Hi, Mike.
Hello, Mohit.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. Good evening for you. Good afternoon for me.
Good evening. Mike, I think the system went live before we did.
Oh, okay. So good job. I wonder what you're saying.
People here. There are quite a few friends who are here. There's John. Oh, there's Tia as well. Welcome, Tia. We haven't met yet, but I've heard so much about you. Welcome, Salil. Divya, welcome. Leslie, Hemaji, John, how are you doing, my friend? Meera, Deva, Prasad, welcome, friends. This is going to be very interesting. Mike, we have people coming in, and over 100 people have signed up. Let's see how many show up.
Yeah.
And so, friends, Mike and I are here to take you through this virtual journey of to Borneo, which is very interesting. So this is the Malaysian side, Sabah, and both Mike and I have traveled through this area independently. I went to Borneo in 2019, and I think, Mike, when did you go to Borneo?
The year before, 2018.
Oh, yeah, 2018, right. And I traveled with a friend of mine, Vivek Menon. Vivek was there for IUCN Asian Elephant Conference. So I just tagged along. And we had the most mesmerizing 2 weeks there. This webinar is all about taking you through this journey. The intent behind this is to talk about orangutan conservation, create possibilities for those people who are already engaged with saving orangutans, internationally and in Borneo. And we want to start creating possibilities to increase their visibility, their work, and see if we can help them in due course with anything that they need. So this webinar will also talk about all the gems and jewels that this place has in terms of wildlife, birds, landscapes that Mike will present. He's a better presenter than I am. And he's done a lot of work with Salil and my team, Priya, setting this webinar together. And so the team at Asian Adventures works really hard, to bring these little sessions to you, which will then pave the way for conservation travel ahead, or any sort of conservation thing that you can think about, or increase your knowledge to help the species on this planet. So a quick round of introduction. Mike, I have an old introduction of yours. Then you can add whatever you want to after you got exiled from India. So ever since his childhood in England, Mike has been fascinated with watching birds and recording and documenting bird sightings. Mike lived in Delhi in the year 2002. He was a very active member of the Delhi Bird Club and contributed to the Atlas of the Birds of Delhi and Haryana. After he moved to Bangalore, he soon got interested in exploring sites that weren't visited so frequently. He worked for Bird Count India to help promote Indian birding and especially high-quality data recording. He's an eBird reviewer for India. His interest in bird recording and migration led to a short-term assignment of his running the BTO's Bird Track program. So this is about Mike and a bit about me. For those who don't know me and are here for the first time, I am Mohit Aggarwal. I'm an experiential ecotourism specialist. I help people travel to some wonderful places in Asia. I'm on the board of Asian Ecotourism Network, and I've been trained by GSTC and certified in sustainable tourism. I'm the founder of Asian Adventures, a 28-year-old travel outfit. It is the largest and #1 bird watching tour company in India. I'm also the founder of Natty Netta, a digital marketing company that is working towards strengthening communication for ecotourism and conservation outfits. These two companies are on a mission to help Asian elephants with the corridors, free the Himalayas of plastic waste, help small wildlife NGOs, and conserve the ancient Himalayan temples. So this is a bit about me. Over to you, Mike. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Mohit. I don't think I'll add much to my introduction because there's too much to talk about with birds and wildlife in Borneo. But just to say, I'm currently in the UK, where I've unfortunately been exiled, but missing being back in India. Anyway, let's get started because I'll probably overrun in time because there's too much to show again. And we should be able to see a lovely bit of cloud forest there, Borneo. Borneo is just a brilliant place for wildlife all round. It's got some of the world's most diverse rainforests and actually probably some of the best intact rainforests in Southeast Asia, because obviously a lot of habitat has unfortunately gone over the years. Wildlife all round is brilliant, not just birds. In fact, birds are probably secondary. Brilliant place for photography. But there are more than 50 endemic birds for those people who are keen on that. So a little bit of history was Borneo. It's the third largest island in the world, largest in Asia, Greenland being the largest one, of course. And it's the center of what tends to be known as maritime Southeast Asia, which is the old East Indies. Borneo is not a country, which obviously people don't realize, but it's split between three countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, and a tiny bit, the tiny kingdom of Brunei. So Kalimantan is the Indonesian portion. It's about 73% of the area and a similar amount of population. And Malaysian Borneo is two districts, Sabah and Sarawak. And most of what we talk about and go through today is from Sabah, which is has some of the best sites and the easiest visiting. Borneo is on the equator, so the climate is very tropical rainforest. Where is it? It's that big island in the sort of slightly right and below center there. We've squeezed in India into the map, so you can see we're about 4,000 kilometers from Chennai. And I thought I'd better do a little bit of a history lesson. So Borneo was controlled by the Sultanate of Brunei in the 15th and 17th centuries, and then suffered quite a lot of turmoil when the Portuguese came, followed by the British and Dutch. Lots of skirmishes over spices, and eventually that's where the Dutch East Indies came from, the Indonesian bits of Borneo, and Britain gained protectorates in the north. During the Second World War, much of Borneo was annexed by the Japanese. It was occupied by the Japanese, sorry, until end of the war. Sarawak and Sabah were annexed as British territories. The Dutch East Indies became Indonesia shortly afterwards. And then a little bit later, Malaysia was formed from Singapore, Malaya as it was, and Sarawak and Sabah. Fairly recently, Brunei gained its independence from Britain. And very recently, interestingly, the capital of Indonesia, which is Jakarta in Java, is planned to be moved to Kalimantan in Borneo, a new city called Nusantara. And a little bit actually very topical, very, very new. As we were researching this, in the last week, there was a paper published in Nature with some old history from Borneo, because they recently discovered remains of a human being, Homo sapiens, which seemed to be the earliest known record of an amputee, dated to over 30,000 years ago. And in context, the oldest amputation known before was about 7,000 years. And it was something like a 20-year-old, probably male, who had an amputation, deliberate amputation of most of the left leg. And they could tell from the body, from the remains, that there was growth after the amputation. So he managed to survive for some length of time, despite the fact that he'd have lost a lot of blood. There have been all sorts of possibilities of infections. And it's thought that he must have had post-operative care. It's pretty fascinating from 30,000 years ago. So whether he was awake through it or had been taking lots of medicinal plants to sedate him, we won't know. Anyway, Kota Kinabalu is the capital of Sabah in Malaysia. That mosque is a famous site there. So about 2/3 of the population is Muslim. And total population of Borneo is about 23 million people, most of which are in Indonesian Borneo. And it's quite tribal, or at least there's about 2 million or so tribal people. The Dayak is a group of ethnic groups that are indigenous to Borneo. There's about 50 or more different groups. They have a sort of religion based on local spirits and omen animals traditionally, but now are mostly Christian. And they used to have a lot of intertribal fighting, and so quite a lot of these tribes were headhunters in the past. They're mostly agricultural, shifting agriculture is how they their subsistence. And this is the traditional houses for some of the Dayak tribes. These are called long houses, which were community living. So they might have 50 or 100 families living in one of these for protection. This is a traditional dance, the Hudok dance, which is sort of a harvest festival. And you can see the masks they're wearing there are of hornbills. Thankfully not actual hornbills, but we'll talk about the hunting a little bit later. So there's some of the tribes, the Kayan, who are mostly in Sarawak on the rivers, quite similar to some of the Thai Myanmar tribes. The Bidaya, who are known as the Land Dayak. And the Iban, who are known as the Sea Dayak. Lots of tattoos of cultural symbolism, animals especially. And food, of course. Not surprisingly, food's a mixture of sort of Chinese, Malayan, as well as indigenous food. In here, traditionally it's served in a bamboo tube like this. And some of the traditional dishes, amboyat. It's a national dish of Brunei, quite common through Malaysian Borneo. And interestingly, in this picture, it's the uninteresting looking white gloopy stuff down at the bottom is amboyat. It's made from sago, which is the starch from palm stems, but usually served with a number of other dishes and sauces. So you see a lot of fried fish, which is very common. And this is a traditional dish in Sabah, Hinava. This is fish. It's a fish salad, effectively. Ginger, shallots, chilies, often karela, which is bitter gourd. But this is raw fish, for those who don't know it. It's cooked, but cooked in citrus spices, so like lime juice, for example, so not actually cooked through heat. Anyway, where are we going in Borneo? So this map is mostly Sabah. See Kota Kinabalu, the capital, towards the northwest there. Mount Kinabalu is one of the first stops often. And then we're going to cover a few sites further east in a lot of the lowland rainforest. So the Sepilok area, Kinabatangan River and the Gomantong Caves nearby, and two wonderful wildlife sanctuaries, Dunham Valley and Tabin further south. So Mount Kinabalu first. This is the highest mountain in Borneo, so 4,095 meters is the peak, part of the Crocker range of mountains. The name of the highest peak, ironically, is called Low's Peak. Not because of its altitude, but after Sir Hugh Low, who was the first to climb it in 1851. But really spectacular landscape. It's actually, as mountains go, it's very young. So it's supposed to be formed about 10 million years ago, which to put it in context, Everest, which is also, the Himalayas are a very young range of mountains, was supposed to be about 50 to 60 million years ago. So it's a lot more recent than Everest. And if you're from India, the Western Ghats are much more like an old mountain range, about 150 million years. Kinabalu National Park is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the first one in Malaysia. And for serious birders, Mount Kinabalu is a must. Whilst wildlife is brilliant across a lot of Borneo, quite a few of the endemics are found here. It goes up to higher altitude, attracts a few different birds and species that you don't find in the lower rainforests. But it does include a few familiar families, at least for Indian birders. A fairly nondescript red-eyed bulbul, for example, which is a fairly common bird throughout. But most of the birds I'll show are a bit more stunning. So something like Temminck's sunbird, which is a bit like a Vigor's sunbird from Goa and parts of the Western Ghats. Again, something fairly similar to Indian birders, an indigo flycatcher. This is quite common in the mountain areas. It's the same genus as verditer flycatcher. Borneo whistling thrush, which is a fairly drab but exciting bird to find. Another endemic. And this one's not endemic, found further across Indonesia and Philippines, the Sunda bush warbler. It's actually a very skulking bush warbler, typical bush warbler. So I was rather pleased to get this photo when I was there. Okay, and one of the small birds, one of these sort of very active little brown jobs, if you like, is not a Jurgeny, which is what you might think this is. This is a golden-bellied Jurgeny. They're a family, well, the family is the thornbills, which go across Southeast Asia and Australasia in particular. And this is found throughout a lot of Borneo. Swifflets we have. This is a flock coming into roost in Mount Kinabalu in actually a gate of the park headquarters where they roost every night. So these are Plume-Toed Swifflets, which is what used to be glossy swiftlet. That was split a few years ago. So glossy is now further east in Indonesia and elsewhere in Southeast Asia. And Plume-Toed is the one that's a bit further west, which is the same species that we get on the Andamans. Can be very common, but there's quite a few. There are a few other swiftlets, including on Mount Kinabalu, the endemic Bornean swiftlet. One stunner, fairly common in the mountains, chestnut-hooded laughing thrush. Really pretty bird. It's interesting, the patch around the eye. So there's some bare orbital skin just at the bottom and behind the eye. And Everett's thrush is a endemic, difficult to find, quite a shy bird, quite a restricted range. It's a Zoothra thrush, so same family as scaly thrush and orange-headed ground thrush, and quite similar in behaviour, difficult to find. Here's some of the stunners, though. Banded broadbill. This is a lovely Southeast Asian species. The colour, the wonderful purple maroon colour on this, quite striking. Fairly common, as is one of the other broadbills, black and yellow broadbill, which is one you can expect to see in quite a few places here. And a few other spectacular birds now. So Mr. Whitehead's spider hunter. It's endemic, a large spider hunter, very restricted range, quite a key bird to see. As is another of Mr. Whitehead's birds, Whitehead's Trogon. There's 6 species of trogons in Borneo. This is endemic and pretty uncommon. And he was still at it, Mr. Whitehead. What about this then? Whitehead's broadbill. This is a stunning bird. It's quite a large broadbill, and the males are quite an iridescent green colour. This is, again, quite difficult to find. Mount Kinabalu has these 3 species, which tend to be known as the Whitehead's Trinity. And really key if you're in Mount Kinabalu area to try and find all 3 of the Whitehead's Trinity. Fruit hunter. It's an interesting endemic. It's a thrush, or part of the thrush family, but quite distinct. It's more closely related to orioles, I think, and it's a monotypic genus, so it's the only species in this genus in the world. It, surprisingly enough, eats mostly fruit. And because of that, it's nomadic, so they tend to follow where the fruiting trees are. Occasionally, you can find large flocks if the fruiting is good. More often than not, you probably can't find any. And it's not just birds. So a few of the small mammals that you'll find around. Borneo black-banded squirrel. It's an endemic just in North Borneo. A couple of others you can see quite often, the tiny least pygmy squirrel. And Provost squirrel. It's almost entirely black, but it has red on the belly, which you can't quite see here. These are found across Southeast Asia, and some of them have got large patches of white on, so it's quite a spectacular squirrel in parts of its range. So some of the mammals are good, but it's not just birds and mammals. Plants. So I don't know who knows of the Rafflesia. So there's about, in Mount Kinabalu, it's supposed to have about 5,000 or 6,000 species of flowering plants. And in particular, one of the ones found in this area is the Rafflesia. This is Rafflesia keithae, which is endemic to Borneo. They're parasitic plants, and they look, or supposed to look and smell in particular, like rotting corpses. And when they are smelly, it's a really strong smell, but it's there to attract certain insects. So the sort of insects that would go to a rotting corpse, so various beetles, flies, etc., which come and pollinate. They don't have leaves, they don't have stems, they don't have any roots. They just grow on vines nearby, and they can be huge. So this one, keithae, is up to about 1 meter across. Really strange and spectacular plant. And then moving on. So this is now moving east, about probably about 5 or 6 hours drive from Mount Kinabalu, or a flight from Kota Kinabalu if you want to do it more comfortably. This is the Kinabatangan River, the longest river in Sabah, over 500 kilometers. And then it opens out into the sea northeast Borneo, the Sulu Sea, which goes across to the Philippines. It begins in the Crocker Range near Mount Kinabalu. And the river then flows through rainforests, it flows through mangroves, it makes quite a lot of oxbow lakes. It's quite slow flowing and therefore floods quite impressively and creates very fertile floodplains. So it's a spectacular habitat, super density of wildlife, and it's best explored by boat. So gently cruising down the river and seeing what you can see. Lovely place. You can also cruise down at night, which is just an unforgettable experience. So you're on one of the boats down the river. Looks very pleasant. It is, of course, a rainforest, though, so it's not always that pleasant. This is a Pacific swallow, quite common throughout Southeast Asia, including the Andamans. Not quite so common is the black magpie. It's an endemic to Borneo. And one that may be familiar with, looks like common kingfisher. This is the blue-eared kingfisher, the forest river kingfisher, same species we get in India. And not quite same species, although you might think it is. This is Oriental dwarf kingfisher, but this is the rufous-backed dwarf kingfisher. The one you get in India is black-backed, and you can just about see the rufous patch on this one. And this one is photographed from one of the night cruises down the river. So this is a bird that was actually roosting at night. So Kinabatangan River is probably the best place in the world to see what is the rarest stork in the world. This is storm stork. And it's thought to be no more than 500 individuals left in the wild. This is actually taken from just outside the lodge where we were staying in Kinabatangan. Crested serpent eagle, another familiar bird for Indians, but I don't know how many people have seen the crest like that. And here's a really nice one here. This is Duffy Fish Owl. So not one you get in India except for very, very small area of the Sundarbans. But it's reasonably common along here. It's highly nocturnal, but along the rivers. And they come to shore, so they'll often perch beside the river and come down to the shore to catch crustaceans, insects, small birds and mammals, as well as fish. But one of the things they do, because they are nocturnal, they'll use artificial light for hunting. So if you're staying at Dunham Valley, in particular, at the research centre where I stayed when I was there before, the basketball court is the place to go to see Duffy Fish Owl. You can go down there at dusk, and they use the artificial lights, and then they'll perch on top of the lights and use the lights to see things to hunt. But equally, I think we saw 3 or 4 on one night cruise. So brilliant bird. Probably the largest bird found in the rainforests. There's several species of hornbills. This is rhinoceros hornbill. This one it's almost only found in primary forest and is quite endangered, mostly through habitat destruction, but also hunting. Hunting for food, hunting for medicines, and then the casque, well, in fact, the bill, the casque, and the feathers all were traditionally used in costumes and rituals. There's a few places you can see rhinoceros hornbill, so thankfully they're still not too difficult to find. And this is a particularly interesting bird that is found in the Kinabatangan area, Bornean ground cuckoo. So this is a large cuckoo, ground dwelling, as you'd expect from its name. So they feed mostly on the forest floor. It's rare. It's not that easy to see. The best way of seeing it is probably from a very slow moving boat. You're looking through the undergrowth. And what they are known to do sometimes is they'll follow animals. So they'll follow bearded pigs, for example, who might be disturbing some invertebrates in the undergrowth. Heard more often than seen. And won't be surprising then this river that we have crocodiles. The saltwater crocodile, which is the largest reptile in the world. And water monitors. And these get pretty big as well. This is the same species that's across Southeast Asia. They're also quite common, and they're quite opportunistic feeders. So they feed around human habitation and in oil palm plantations. So one of the things you find, unfortunately, in Borneo and lots of other areas is the amount of forest that's been cut down and replaced with oil palm plantations for palm oil. And then these habitats are quite open. There's a lot of rats, for example, in there. But it's one of the things that water monitors have taken advantage of. There's the bearded pig. As you can see, these are, the males especially have this large, obvious beard. And plenty of monkeys around. So this one is, well, maroon leaf monkey. It's not really very maroon colored here. I think they do vary across their range. It's also known as red leaf monkey, which in these examples is not quite appropriate either. This is endemic to the Bornean rainforests. And Muller's gibbon. So Muller's gibbon is endemic to Borneo, now split into 3 different species. So this is eastern grey gibbon, which is the one you find in, I think it's the only one you find in Sabah and Sarawak. Gibbons, as you know, swing through the trees a lot. They are because they do that, they're the fastest non-flying arboreal mammal in the world. And especially if you're in India, because Tintin was always very popular, you might recognize Tintin fans Mr. Rastapopoulos. This is the Proboscis monkey, which was famous in Tintin novels for looking for Mr. Rastapopoulos, having a nose much like a proboscis monkey. These are quite often seen in Kinabatangan, and they're amazing. They're very long tails, obviously the large noses. They live in small groups in these mangrove areas, and you can often see them from the boat or crossing over the river where there's overhead wires across the river. So they'll go hand over hand down the wires. But quite an unusual monkey. They can swim prolifically, and they'll sometimes just belly flop down from trees or the wires into the water. They swim well. They've got webbed digits, so they can swim well because crocodiles are one of their main predators. So that helps them evade the crocodiles. And they also have a very complicated digestive system with lots of different chambers and apparently 9 stomachs. Palm civets are quite common. It's the same species we get in India. Not surprisingly, with all the oil palm plantations, palm civets have done very well. And this one is photographed at night in an oil palm plantation. And this is the beautiful leopard cat. It's actually only fairly recently been split. This is Sunda Leopard Cat. So a different species to the one which you can very rarely find in India and quite widespread. These are actually relatively common. I saw a few, particularly from the night boats in Kinabatangan, but they obviously do well with the oil palm plantations. They'll feed on rats. So there is a very good chance of seeing the leopard cat. Now, not very far away from Kinabatangan are the Gomantong Caves. Some of you may have seen this in one of David Attenborough's programs 5 or 6 years ago. This is just an incredible wildlife experience, maybe not an especially pleasant one for many people. It's the Gomantong Hill is a large limestone outcrop, and the caves here are absolutely infested with bat droppings, bat guano, which just covers the floor. And the floor is just covered then with insects, some centipedes, quite a lot of centipedes, but in particular, it's literally crawling with cockroaches. There are probably billions of cockroaches on the floor of this cave. You can go through a walk through. Thankfully, there's a raised boardwalk, so you don't actually have to crunch through billions of cockroaches as you're going. But they restrict entry because the smell is quite overwhelming. So you can do one route through, but it's not recommended to do too long there. But it is a phenomenal experience and well worth doing, not just for the cockroaches, various other things. So swifflets. So swifflets nest here, 2 or 3 species nest here. This is a white nest swifflet, and you can see how white the nest is. The nest for white nest swifflet is almost entirely made of saliva, and this is what's particularly prized for bird's nest soup. So harvesting of swifflet nests has been a major problem in Borneo, as well as lots of else Southeast Asia and the Andamans as well. What happens here is the cave is protected by guards, so no one can come and harvest these nests, but then they are actually harvested after the birds have bred. So the nests are then taken. This is, as I said, white nest swiftlet. There's one of the other swiftlets. The nest here is mossy nest swiftlet, which, as you imagine, has a bit more sort of green moss in the nest. Extremely difficult to identify. So the best way of identifying it is by the nest that it's on. And that's the swiftlet nests that have been harvested. So made into bird's nest soup, as we've all heard of, I'm sure, but also used in medicine. But this is the most spectacular thing. If you don't like your cockroaches, which are spectacular, this is one reason to visit Gomantong Caves. There are 2 or 3 species of bats, I think, but this is the common one, wrinkle-lipped, free-tailed bat. And at dusk, they absolutely swarm out of the caves. There's known to be well over 1 million bats. And when you come at dusk, they're just streaming out in thousands, tens of thousands. It's just the most amazing sight to see these clouds of free-tailed bats filling the sky. They also get preyed upon by bat hawk, well-known, well-named raptor, and peregrine falcons as well, which take bats in flight, so they just wait for them to come out every dusk. Moving on from Kinabatangan River, the Dunham Valley. The Dunham Valley is probably, well, certainly the most amazing forest I've ever been to in my life. It's about 130 million years old. Makes it one of the oldest rainforests in the world. There's this pterocarp trees, so that's a family of trees which are little tropical lowland rainforest trees, and they're incredibly tall. So many of the trees here go up to over 80 meters high. I think they've measured one that just breaks the 100-meter height, which is just incredible. So to stand in some of these trees is amazing. There is a huge diversity of wildlife in Dunham. Not all obvious to see because it's quite tricky in some of these denser forests with very tall trees. But one wonderful thing they have here is that they've built these walkways. So you have these canopy walkways. So you can go up, maybe not to the 80-meter mark, but at least I think 30 or 40 meters, and then walk through here, and you just get views of some of the in the lower canopy trees, some of the birds you just never get proper views of below. So the birds used to seeing the underparts only, you can then start watching at eye level. Also some of the primates here as well. Just brilliant experience to walk and just spend some time on these canopy walkways. And some great birds as well. So this is a crested fireback. This is a forest pheasant, fairly uncommon. You can also do night drives, or night walks rather, in Dunham Valley. So we were lucky to find a pair of crested firebacks roosting above the path when we did a walk in the evening. And this spectacular bird, the great Argus. So this is about the size of a peafowl. Incredible long tail feathers, and these are the secondaries, these incredibly long feathers. The central tail feathers themselves can apparently be about 1.5 meters in length. It's difficult to see. They call frequently, but they're pretty secretive. But they have this amazing display, a courtship display where the tail is fanned and the wings are fanned. Unfortunately, it's a bird that I only heard and didn't see, so we'll be trying hard next time. That's some other great birds here. Red-throated sunbird, pretty attractive one, quite similar to ruby-cheeked sunbird, you might know from parts of Assam and other parts of northeast India. Red-bearded beater, brilliant, red and then pinkish on the crown. So this is one of the 3 bearded beaters worldwide. So blue-bearded beater that we know in India, purple bearded beater in the Philippines, and this one. And I think, having seen the others, I think unfortunately in India the blue one is quite boring in comparison. These are brilliant birds. And pittas. So Borneo is great for pittas generally. There's 10 species, typically difficult to see. This one is the black-crowned pitta, sometimes known as black and crimson pitta. It's one of the commoner ones. I really struggle to see it, I'd hear them quite often. And then when I was walking down a narrow path in Dunham Valley, one just hopped up onto a branch that went right across the track. And it just sat in the open on this branch singing for a few minutes. I was just stood there listening and watching this black-crowned pitta at such close range. So we were hard work, but the most amazing views of this one. But that, in comparison to some of the other pittas, is the fairly boring looking one. Banded pitta, a real stunner. This is endemic. It's been split since from the other banded pittas in Java and elsewhere in Malaysia. So this is Bornean banded pitta. And this one's quite nice, but still not the nicest, I think. Blue banded pitta. A really unusual one. This is endemic. It's pretty rare. I heard it a few times in Dunham Valley, and one in particular I heard coming incredibly close. It sounded like it was maybe 3 meters, 4 meters at most, and I just stood and waited in the area for about 3 hours, hearing it regularly, and I never got a sighting of it at all. Did see this one rather nicely though. This is white-fronted falconet. So you might know pied falconet from the northeast, really. Collared falconet a bit more regularly in the Himalayan areas in India. White-fronted falconet is actually very slightly smaller. So that makes it the smallest raptor in the world. I think they're sort of 14, 15 centimeters they can be, which is actually about the same size as a house sparrow. Another endemic just to North Borneo. Quite a few species of barbets, as typical, more often heard than seen. This one's red-throated barbet, which might not seem particularly well named, but this is a female that doesn't have the obvious red throat that the male has. Whiskered tree swift, brilliant looking tree swift. This one on the nest. And then one of the other hornbills, this one is probably one of the easier ones to see, wrinkled hornbill. And a particularly unusual one, this is helmeted hornbill. This is huge. It's, well, probably similar or a bit bigger than the great Indian hornbill, in particular because of that very long tail, the very long central tail feathers that it has. But it's quite a weird hornbill. It has the casque that you can see there, but then also lots of this bare skin around the neck. Now, what's unique about helmeted hornbill is that the casque it has is solid. It's keratin, but solid keratin. All other hornbills, the casque is hollow. And that's part of the problem why this bird has been poached very badly. It's suffered some severe hunting loss. Also, like much of the other birds here, severe habitat deforestation, and it is critically endangered. You can probably hear them. You have to be a little bit lucky to see them, and thankfully I was when we were there last time. But one of the rarest birds there is now. And another very unusual bird. So this is the Bornean bristlehead. It's endemic. It's a monospecific family. So the bristlehead family only has this one species in across the entire world. It's sort of a little bit shrike-like, but it's odd. With a large bill with a hook and a very short tail, strange-looking bird. It also, you can sort of see here, that some of the feathers on the head and the neck are stiff, which is why it gets its name, bristlehead. Difficult bird to see. Kinabatangan, Dunham Valley, they can be found around there, but partly difficult because it's nomadic. So they do move around and not necessarily reliable in one spot. So that was a lot of the birds, but there's a lot more to Borneo than birds. If you're into frogs, it's an incredible place. It's supposed to be, I think, more than 150 species of frogs. And again, if you go out on the night walk, you can find a lot of the interesting ones. There are some incredible tree frogs, especially. But what Borneo is probably most famous for would be the orangutan. It's the only ape in Asia. They're only found in Borneo and Sumatra. And it's very close to humans, one of our closest relatives. So we share 90% of human DNA they have. 97%, sorry, which is obviously quite a lot. But apparently, to put it into context, we have almost 60% the same DNA as a banana. So I'm not quite sure how closely related we are to orangutans. There are 3 species recognized generally. All of them are critically endangered. Poaching, obvious problem. Deforestation, major problem. So the Borneo orangutan, I think, it has declined by more than 50% in about the last 50 years. But what's the biggest problem there is that the habitat destruction has been much faster than that. So it's thought that more than 50% of the habitat has gone in just about the last 20 years or so. So really severely endangered. They're quite interesting. They're mostly arboreal, so they stay in the trees quite a lot. And they're quite solitary. So unlike some of the other great apes like chimpanzees and gorillas in Africa, which are in family social groups, orangutans are usually solitary. You might see a female with with young. They mostly eat fruit, and they're extremely intelligent apes. So they'll use tools for feeding, and they make nests. So they sleep every night in a nest high up in the trees. So they pull together branches and gather leaves and make these nests that they sleep in. So you'll see the nests around in Dunham Valley and Kinabatangan. And you have a good chance of seeing them, thankfully. There's a mother with its baby. So one place we would visit near Kinabatangan is a place called Sepilok, which is actually a lovely rainforest. It's where I saw Bornean bristlehead when I was there last time. But they have a rehabilitation center for orangutans. So that's orphaned baby orangutans coming from logging sites. So where the trees have been logged to put up a palm oil plantation, they've lost their habitat, illegal hunting, even captured as pets. So they have rescued lots of orangutans over, it's been going a long time, I think maybe 30, 40 years or so it's been set up. and they have this rehabilitation project where they get them back into being able to be released in the wild. So that's a great place for getting to see orangutans up close and to understand a lot about the conservation work that's done for them. And this is one of the large dominant males, incredible creatures. They develop these big cheek pads, these cheek flanges. Can be up to about 90 kilograms in weight, and about, I think, about 4'6" high. And slightly smaller this time and slightly slower. The slow loris is an omnivorous primate, so mostly eats fruit, but does eat various things. And it's the world's only venomous primate. So they have a gland where there's a secretion from this gland that they mix with saliva, and that creates a venom which is used as a deterrent to predators. And I think they use it more as a deterrent. The females will smear it on their young, but they will bite if they're threatened. And for a small mammal, for example, that bite would be fatal. And apparently there is one known human death from a slow loris bite. Not necessarily so much from the strength of the venom itself, but it's someone who went into anaphylactic shock, I think, as an allergic reaction to it. So be careful, don't scare a slow loris. Not quite so dangerous, although these are actually carnivorous, unlike lorises. The western tarsier obviously looks like something out of Lord of the Rings. They have these large eyes which help them assess the distance, and then they leap quite long distances through the trees, about 5 meters or so they can leap. And you can see the size, the length of the ankle bones here. Ankle bone being the tarsus, hence the name tarsier. So there's long bones there which help them leap. From one small creature to another small creature, the pygmy elephant. Clearly not actually that small, but the other smallest elephant subspecies there is. So like the other main difference, I suppose, on elephants you get in India is they have a very long tail. You can just about see in this picture, but it almost touches the ground. Extremely endangered from habitat loss is the most obvious thing, but there's thought to be less than 1,500 pygmy elephants, Bornean pygmy elephants in the wild. And the sun bear, something you'd be very lucky to see, but it's the smallest true bear. They're nocturnal, omnivorous like most bears, but pretty shy. But they have this lovely crescent, this orangey yellow crescent on the chest, which is supposed to depict the rising sun, hence the name sun bear. Speaking of bears, here's a bear cat. Quite an unusual mammal, binturong or bear cat. It's not a bear and it's not a cat. It's actually the same family as the civics. And unusually, binturongs have a reproductive strategy, which is called embryonic diapause, where they can delay when the embryo gets implanted in the uterus. So therefore, they can delay having their young to whenever conditions are most suitable. So very few mammals do that. And there's lots of interesting mammals in Borneo. Here's another one, the colugo, really unusual, sometimes known as a flying lemur, although again, it's not really a primate. They're genetically a bit similar, but they glide, so they're gliding mammals. They have this membrane, a little bit like a bat, which runs from their neck to their hands, to their toes, to the tail. So when they glide and they open up their arms and their legs, they glide a bit like a kite. And really slow, graceful gliders, but you'll find them during the day. They roost on trees like this. They can't climb very well though, so they don't have the strength to climb, and they don't have opposing thumbs, so they can't grip properly to climb, so they're quite clumsy then. And more cats. So there's plenty of cat. I think there's about 5 species of cats in Borneo. This is the marbled cat, which we also get through the Himalayas. Eat mostly sort of small rodents and birds. They're very large canines, unusually large compared to other cats. And then probably the most special of them all, the Bornean clouded leopard. It's a subspecies of the Sunda clouded leopard. Really interesting. You can see from this picture as well the size of the mouth or the jaws. They have a very wide mouth, and they can open their jaws wider than any other cat, apparently. They have quite long canines, a little bit like saber-toothed tigers from that point of view. And in fact, their canines are supposed to be the same size as the tiger, even though the animal itself is about 10 times smaller, or at least in weight and body size. Again, very threatened, poaching and habitat loss. So you see the common thread to threats to wildlife in Borneo and much else of Southeast Asia. So if you were to see the Bornean clouded leopard, I think there'd be some pretty wonderful mammals and birds you see on a trip to Borneo, but that would have to be the highlight, I think. And there we go. Thank you very much for a whistle-stop tour of a few birds and a lot of mammals, but just a small bit of the fun and incredible wildlife that Borneo has to offer. I have to say thank you to all the photographers. Again, haven't actually been credited in the slideshow, but thank you for them, and thank you to Salil and the others at Asian Adventures who put some of the pictures together. And I also need to say thank you to my research assistant, Tia, who was particularly good at putting out some of the interesting and wacky facts. So, anyway, thank you all very much.
What a brilliant presentation, Mike. It was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
So I'm going to quickly tell them that you have a tour running in May 2023.
I do indeed. I may have been exiled here in England, but I can't stay out of Asia too long, so I'm going to shoot across India and head to Borneo in May. Yeah, that was really exciting. So looking forward to that.
I'm posting some links here, which will be useful for you. And there's a tour as well, a tour link, which you can which will be tweaked, and the price will be put in a few days. In the meantime, you can still see the tour and you can go through some of the details. We'll keep checking and keep adding more information to that as we go along. Just to let you know, if you're interested, then you should pick up this book. This was given to me by Quentin 2 months ago in England when I was there. And I'm really, really grateful to him. And he signed this copy for me here. And I'll tell you, this is one of the best books to get for yourself when you're planning to visit Borneo. And the other one, which is useful, is this one, Birds of Borneo, right? And
you can try this one. There's another Bird of Borneo. So thankfully, we're well provided with some great guides now.
Good. So collect your books and start going through them, because the itinerary will take you through Sepilok, Kinabatangan, Dunham. We will miss Dharmakot this time because we're going to add Tabin as well, but we're going to go to Mount Kinabalu, and this will be 10 plus 4 day trip, and we'll let you know more about it. If you're interested in doing this trip, just write interested in chat box so I know that you're the people to to get after and get you to sign up. So just write interested if you're interested. Even if you're not interested, just write 1 day. So I will know one day.
I think Borneo is a must for if you're interested in wildlife. I think, and in particular, Southeast Asia, a lot of places have suffered so much. I mean, you see that the amount of deforestation there has been, and for palm oil plantations, but Borneo and in particular Sabah are making some brilliant efforts to conserve the rainforest that they have there. And places like Dunham is just the most spectacular forest there is.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of good conservation work going, so it's well worth visiting. I thought I'd pick up on a couple of the comments, mostly about like the style of birding. So interesting, actually, when I went 4 years ago, I was trying to decide where to go because I had some time off. I had a business which unfortunately closed, and I had some time off, and I thought I'm going to travel for a while. And I thought I'd go to Northeast India. I thought I haven't done enough in Northeast India. And I decided, actually, it's quite hard work in Northeast India. And I would research Borneo. And I thought, wow, that sounds a fantastic place. So I went and I spent a month in Borneo, mostly in Sabah, a little bit in Sarawak. And I did it all by public transport. And it was really organized. Some nice, comfortable places to stay. I didn't spend a lot of money in places. You can do some of it comfortably. You spend a little bit more in some places like Kinabatangan because you want a really nice place on the river and to do the boats. The Dunham Valley is quite difficult. There's only 2 or 3 places. It's deep inside the forest. There's only 2 or 3 places to stay. And it's interesting. One is a research center, which has facilities for guests. And I stayed there. I stayed for a week there, actually, and it was just brilliant. Not cheap, even though it was a research center, but comfortable and brilliant. And the other place there was an incredibly luxurious lodge where, coincidentally, a friend of mine from England was staying at the same time. So I bumped into them, but they were staying there. But birding-wise, it's not much done from hides, although you'll do things like just staying from the boat, so gliding down the boat and just pausing in the boat in places like Kinabatangan. But it's generally quite comfortable birding most places. Dunham has some quite well-maintained trails. It also has some very badly maintained trails, so I did a few experiments going on places people don't go until the leeches forced me back again. Mount Kinabalu is interesting. It's just lovely. It's a popular tourist site, but you've got some brilliant marked trails, so you can go off on your own and get away completely from people. There's some what I didn't do last time. There is the most amazingly named bird. If you like your bush warblers, there is an endemic which is called friendly bush warbler. And unfortunately, friendly bush warbler is not as friendly as it could be, because for that you have to do a very long hike near the summit. Which I didn't do that time, but no, generally it's pretty comfortable. People are great, food's great. It's a must, I think, for wildlife in general in Asia. Someone else asking how easy it is to see the orangutan. So I think you can guarantee seeing them because you visit the rehabilitation center in Sepilok. In the wild, I was really lucky when I turned up because we arrived at Kinabatangan in the lodge you get to by boat, then get dropped off at just a very basic lodge. And we had about half an hour before lunch. And a couple of friends I was with at the time went to their room, and I thought, I'll just wander around for half an hour, see if there's any birds, and found a female orangutan with its baby immediately. But they're not that easy. That was a bit lucky. I think I saw one more when I was at Kinabatangan, but then also saw them 2 or 3 days in Dunham. So the chances are more than likely to see orangutan. And Dunham and Kinabatangan both brilliant for that.
Yeah.
I didn't actually cover Tabin Wildlife Sanctuary very much in this, but Tabin also is an interesting area. It's a wildlife sanctuary right on the edge of a palm plantation. So actually you could drive along the road and one side is pristine forest and the other side is just completely cleared palm plantation. But actually for watching wildlife it's quite good because the palm oil plantation is a bit more open and the leopard cats liked it. So at night it was very good for owls as well.
Absolutely. And the Bornean gibbon, which is right outside your dining room in the morning.
That's right.
And at night you'd have civets walking in and so many experiences because the best thing about Borneo is that you can go out at night in the boats and then
it is to do boats, walks, just do all that at night. It's one thing we really miss in India. I was just about to say in this country, forgetting I'm not in India. But it's one thing that we miss in India, I think, is the night walk. So if you do a night walk in Dunham, for example, you get one of the local naturalists to join you, and the frogs and the various insects and things they find is just incredible.
Absolutely. And then, with orangutans, there's something very special about them. They go up to the canopy of the tree and they make a little hut for themselves. They will put all the palm leaves together, the other big leaves together, and they make a rain shelter for themselves, which they use only for a couple of nights.
That's right, yeah.
And then they'll abandon it and they'll go make another hut. So it's literally like a hut where they can sleep without the rain falling on them. and these little huts you'll see. You'll see dark spots in these canopies and say, what are these dark spots? These are actually the huts that have been made by orangutans. So
I mean, they're obviously huge. They have to be really big up there in the canopy. But I've also heard that apparently they've sometimes been known to have like 2 stories. So it's like a bunk bed that they've made up there.
Yeah. There are 2 stories as well. And some of them are absolutely mind-blowing. When you see them, of course, there are rare chances that you'll see one stepping out of his hut in the morning. But if you do, you'll be lucky. And it's so there are many such experiences. You go out in the boat at night looking for kingfishers or other species in Kinabatangan, right? And they've been, people have been looking for bay cat in that area, which very rarely people will see, or a Sunda leopard, which is a clouded leopard, which is there.
One was seen by another group at the time I was at Dunham.
And then we missed it in Tabin, and there was one in Tabin. So
when I was at Tabin, we had the lodge I was staying at had some quite nice huts that you stayed in, but we had a small herd of pygmy elephants walk through that at one time.
Yeah. Also now, Mike, that pygmy elephant is just the same Asian elephant but smaller in size.
That's right. Yes.
But it's no longer considered to be a separate species.
No, so it is a subspecies. They are different, and although they're pygmy, they are elephants. They're quite big.
Yeah, they're quite big. Great. I think it was a wonderful webinar, Mike. Thank you so much, and we're going to carve out certain ways how people can get engaged with orangutan conservation.
I just remembered one thing we just didn't cover here at all, but at the end of my trip, when I did it 4 years ago, I decided to do something completely different, and I went out and spent 2 or 3 nights on one of the islands off the west coast, and just stayed on like a little beach lodge. And every day in the evening, I'd be watching hundreds and hundreds of frigate birds flying around me.
Wow.
And I haven't yet sorted out the photos that I had with Christmas frigate bird and lesser frigate birds in the hundreds just hanging around. So there's
it's been 4 years. You have to do it. You have to do it now.
Yeah, but there's so much scope. And this is all Sabah we've talked about. I spent a few days in Sarawak. In fact, there's some brilliant birding in Sarawak, and it's now just getting a bit easier to access parts, but a little bit more hardcore for doing Sarawak or certainly Kalimantan, the Indonesian stuff. But Sabah is just very well geared up to give you brilliant wildlife and a fairly comfortable experience.
So I'd really like to thank each one of you, whoever's attended this webinar, and people who missed will get the replay link. Anyway, everybody will get the replay link, so you can share it with your friends. You can tell them all about it, and you can watch it again. And it'll also go onto YouTube, so we'll send you the link a little later. Ask people to join this trip with Mike, and I can guarantee you that'll be the most beautiful lifetime experience that they'll get.
It will indeed. It'd be nice to see some of my Indian friends, but maybe grab 1 or 2 from England coming over with me as well and enjoy it.
Wonderful. So I think we can wind up the webinar, and so thank you, friends. Thank you, Mike. Brilliant job done. Again, thank you, and thank you, Tia. Thank you, Asian Adventures team, Salil, Priya, everyone who's been involved. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fareen. And thank you, orangutans. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks.